This morning, we are going to go into the universal language of music. And we have two venerable composers, musicologists, ethnomusicologists with us. I hope we are all musical this morning. Yes, wonderful. So they will talk about two topics. The first topic to be discussed by Dean Ramon Santos is about the varied musical traditions in the Philippines. And the second topic will be, would you believe that Manila was the center of global music in the 19th century? That's his theory. We can challenge him later. Peace. Okay, so let's start. They will be given 20 minutes to talk about their topic, and then we will have a 10-minute singing session with them for your questions and answers. Of course, you know that the Philippines is the karaoke capital of the world, no? So maybe we can sing karaoke later. Okay. Dean Ramon Santos is a composer, a conductor, an ethnomusicologist. He is currently the country's foremost exponent of contemporary Filipino music. We just heard previously one of his compositions. I came from the Philippine High School for the Arts like meLê, yamomo, and ever since I've been in awe of his theory of music making and his compositions as well. No? He's an intense and avid pedagogue. He's the chair of the Department of Composition and Theory and formerly the dean of the College of Music of the University of the Philippines. He has remained instrumental in espousing modern Philippine music rooted in old Asian practices and life concepts, which is very, not the regular thing done in the Philippines, because as a colony of the United States, we sort of like dance to the tune of rock and roll and rap, no? With generation upon generation of students and teachers that have come under his wing, Professor Santos continues to shape a legacy of modernity anchored on the values of traditional Asian music. So let's give him a hand, Dean Santos.
Okay, my topic this morning is the variety of traditional Philippine music that has been evolving through the years, no? So Philippine music is a plethora of traditions that prevailed and developed through the entire history of the nation. The country possesses a wealth of sound-related, performative expressions from the most indigenous Southeast Asian derived practices to the most modern Euro-American acquired repertoires. Can we have the second slide, please? Okay, here, the Philippines traces its musical and folk heritage to two major cultural traditions, no? A Southeast Asian tradition and a Euro-American or Western tradition. The variety of traditional streams and musical repertoires that evolved within these two categories may be further traced to the different influences and connections from different cultures that developed in Filipino societies in the last millennium. Okay, here you see we have the gong and bamboo cultures from Southeast Asia. You have here the flat gong tradition from the northern Philippines. And here you have the boss gongs from the southern Philippines. You have here, for example, the Kulintang Ensemble, which are of course, boss gongs, no? And they come from the Maguindanao tradition. So we trace ourselves from the Southeast Asian cultural heritage. Okay, can we have the second? Okay, here. Our music is really quite varied because we have this in our liturgical practices, no? We have the Passion. The Passion is singing the life and the death of Jesus Christ during Lent, okay? And all over the Philippines, you find this singing by the folks, no? Of and this lasts for 24 hours, okay? And then we have the Subli from the Tagalog region. The Subli, you cannot really categorize it whether it is a dance or music because the people sing the hymns and then they dance. But this is a liturgical practice. This is for in honor of the Holy Cross, okay? And then we have the folk comparsa, which we got from Spain, but then all these folks from the barrios, from the small towns, they have grouped themselves into plucked strings, just like the rondalla that we heard this earlier, no? But anyway, these remain in the barrios, in the small towns. Okay, next, please. Okay, we also developed the band tradition. The band tradition, we got that from Spain and then later on in the United States. And then we have the rondalla. We got this from Spain, but then we developed it into our very own tradition. And then, of course, we have the chorus. The Philippines is now one of the choral bastions in the world, and then we have these festivals in the different regions, no? This is just one of them. This is Pinagbenga, which is the flower festival from Baguio City. Okay. Okay, next. And then we have the popular genres. We have the hot dogs, for example. And then we have the Contagapi, and then the Eraserheads. And then we have also the musicals, just like the Noli Me Tangere, which has been turned into a musical tradition. Okay. So you see the variety of these genres that developed in the Philippines, no? Coming, as I said, from the Southeast Asian traditions and, of course, the Western traditions. Okay. Next. Okay. just to okay, all the forms of sound expression are all Filipino music, which relates itself to a global community through history and affinity. At the same time, we need to preserve the non-Western traditions, which are rich in variety as well as social significance, like the epics. You know, the Philippines has plenty of epics. Almost all the uh, almost all the language groups have their own epics, and we have more than 130 language groups in the Philippines. You know, the Bayok, the Sail, the Buwa, the Ambahan, the Ayueng. These are all forms of expression from the different language groups, okay? And many other forms of expressions which are related to a Southeast Asian mainstream. There is a Filipino music lodged in the reformated Western forms that we have embraced through the millennium of colonial domination, which formulated us as a nation in the first place. We have transformed these influences into our very own through the use of language as well as the infusion of local sentiments and sensitivity, which are different from other humans on earth. You know, we must be proud of what we are, for there is no other people on earth that can surpass what we have achieved as a people and as a nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Santos. I failed to mention that he is our national artist for music. Thank you, sir. And I also want to announce that if you need translation services, you can get a translation device on your right in English or in German. Perfect. Okay, moving on. I would like to introduce my friend, meLê Yamomo. We come from the same school, the Philippine High School for the Arts. But since then, he has left the Philippines and has become an assistant professor of new dramaturgies, media cultures, artistic research, and decoloniality, and author of Sounding Modernities, Theater and Music in Manila and the Asia Pacific, 1869 to 1946. Pardon me, I have a nosebleed. That's a joke. Anyway, meLê is the winner of the Open Ear Award, the most prestigious Composers Prize in the Netherlands, and one of the 2020 KNAW Early Career Awardees by the Netherlands Royal Academy of Arts and Sciences. Is this true or a fake news? This is the first time I'm hearing this, meLê. In his works as an artist scholar, meLê engages the topics of sonic migrations, queer aesthetics, and post-decolonial acoustemologies. I now have a headache, so maybe this is the time for you to explain your topic. Ladies and gentlemen, meLê Yamomo.
Check. Guten Morgen. Good morning. Yes, I also want, of course, to point out that Nick Pichay, a good friend of mine, is also one of the most important playwrights in the Philippines. It is a privilege to follow the lecture of national artist for music, Dr. Ramon Santos. His reflections on the heart of the nation's music, rooted in the indigenous traditions of the Philippines, remind us that our sonic world begins with the voices of the land and the communities who sustain it. My talk moves to a different register, where Dr. Santos takes us to the pulse of the nation. I would invite us to listen to the Philippines as it was engaging the world in the 19th century. Living here in Europe, I am aware of the tension of this position. In the colonial imagination, the global north is the site of universality and modernity. The global south is the site of tradition and ethnicity. When Europeans travel, it is called exploration. When people like me travel, I am called a migrant. This epistemology shapes who remains in the past and who decides about the future. Whose culture should be in the ethnological museum? Whose culture belongs to the contemporary art museum? So the story I share today questions this order. It is the story of the 19th century Indio musicians, colonial subjects who long before the 20th century were already hearing themselves as part of a global modernity. Their folk songs and epic chants resonated in the same world as Strauss, Verdi, and Wagner. Their sounds were not echoes of Europe. They were auditioning for an emergent modern world. I draw from my book, Sounding Modernities. Next slide, please. To discuss this. So before we can listen to the 19th century Manila musicians, we must first listen to the city that shaped them. Manila was already global long before it became the capital of a nation. Next slide, please. While waiting for this, I would argue, well, these are citations in the book that when I wrote this. Economic historian Kevin O'Rourke and Jeffrey Williamson describes globalization as the integration of international commodity markets. So it is from this view that Dennis Flynn and Arturo Giraldes argue that in 1571, the year Manila was founded as a Spanish entrepot, marks the birth of globalization. When the Spanish fleet of Ferdinand Magellan arrived in Cebu in 1521, well, that would have been the world's first circumnavigation, transforming how Europe imagined geography and empire. But it is 50 years later, with the establishment of Manila, which made that imagination material. Global historian Luke Closey writes that what had been a flat, two-dimensional world centered on Rome was now a three-dimensional globe, which centers Mexico City and Manila. Next slide, please. Manila, Flynn and Giraldes remind us, was the first global city. The node where Asia, Europe, the Americas, and the Pacific sustained global circulation through trade for 300 years. Through the Manila-Acapulco galleon route, Manila became one of the earliest hubs of world trade. Ships carried not only silver and silk, but also songs, prayers, and sonic practices. Two forces shaped Manila's sound world. The centripetal force brought all the instruments, repertoires, and musicians from all directions, Mexico, Spain, China, Indonesia, India, into the city. The Indio, the native inhabitant, played a pivotal role. Recruited into military bands, trained in mission schools, and deployed across the islands, they learned to read music, to march, to play European repertoires. I have to annotate here that I call these subjects Indio because in the 19th century, well, in the last 300 years, Europe was going around looking for their spices, and everywhere they end up, they call it their India. Therefore, Indonesia used to be the Dutch Indies, and the peninsular area of Asia is called the French Indochina. And so every people who lived there were called Indians. So if I was born in the 19th century, I would be the Spanish Indian. And this is part, of course, of like an old order that we are trying to correct. But at that point, I called them Indios because they were the lowest in the racial and economic class category. It's important to note that because as they were recruited into military and they were trained in mission schools, they eventually became part of the European trade of music. Through them, empire became audible. Yet, in mastering these forms, they also transformed them. The phrasing of the clarinet, the cadence of the marches, all acquired a local pulse. The Indio musicians became mediators of a hybrid sound neither wholly Spanish nor entirely native. And then came the centrifugal force, the force that goes out. By the late 18th and 19th centuries, missionaries, sailors, and musicians carried Manila's sound across Asia Pacific. This outward movement transformed the city from a colonial outpost into a sonic nexus within the global music sphere. This was not the globalization of free markets or nations, but of empire, hierarchical, unequal, yet deeply entangled. Manila's musicians circulated through colonial networks of trade, labor, and faith. Through these routes, they helped shape the sound of the modern world. So when we later speak of Manila musicians traveling across Asia, we must remember they were not anomalies, but continuations of long sonic history of convergence and circulation. Their music was born in a city that had already been listening to the world for centuries. But to tell this story, we also need to listen to the silences of history. The Manila musicians exist in an archival gap. They left the Spanish colony before the nation of the Philippines was born, so they never entered its official history. When the national archives were built, they recorded citizens, patriots, revolutionaries, but not those who crossed the borders. And in the archives of Singapore, Malaysia, Cambodia, Shanghai, Japan, Indonesia, they appear only as passing references, the Manila Band, always foreign, never belonging. They vanished not because they were unimportant, but because history itself is territorial. The archives listen only within its borders. So to find them, I needed to listen to police and immigration records of neighboring countries' national archives. Next slide, please. In 1891, 12 musicians from Manila applied for passports to travel to Penang. Their names remain in the National Archives of the Philippines. They petitioned the colonial government to leave to, quote, dedicate their lives to the art they profess, unquote. At a time when the arts were reserved for elites, the Indian musicians were declaring themselves artists. From Penang, their journeys branched out. Next slide, please. Some joined the municipal band in Shanghai, others formed the Santa Cecilia Band in Singapore, and others traveled to Phnom Penh to serve in King Narodom's orchestra. From the 1870s to the 1930s, they could be found across Asia playing theaters, operas, circuses, in public gardens and state functions. These musicians unsettled the idea that modernity flowed only from Europe. They were not passive carriers of culture, but translators, resounding modernity through their own ears, bodies, rhythms, and migrations. Their performances stitched Asia's cities into a shared fabric of modern life. At the turn of the 20th century, empire shifted. Spain collapsed, the United States took over, and a new identity, Filipino, emerged. Before then, Filipino referred only to the Spanish-born elite. After 1898, it meant all born in the archipelago. The Manila men became Filipino musicians, now subjects of the American Empire, and their sound did not stop. Also, can we go back to the previous slide, please? I also just want to point out that although they were called Manila musicians, if we look close to these materials, you would see that they come actually from different provinces and towns all over the country, or all the different islands. So at that time, because when you move outside of Spanish Philippines, they cannot call you Indio anymore, so the other neighboring cities need to call them something, and the only thing they could think of is what was stamped on their visa and passport, which says there that they exited Manila. So this is the reason why they ended up being called Manila men or Manila musicians in other cities around them, because the word Filipino was not operational back then yet. No? Can we go to the next slide, please? So while the Philippines was being redefined under the U.S. rule, in Malaya, the Manila Band became the Selangor State Band. In Singapore, the Santa Cecilia Band evolved into a professional orchestra. By the 1930s, Filipino jazz bands were playing in Shanghai, introducing swing and Latin rhythms. So while the Philippines was being redefined under the US rule, Filipino sound had already gone global, part of Asia's modern life, from cabarets to radio. To trace their story, to hear how music outlived empire, carrying identities across changing borders. Most of my encounters with the Manila musicians come through written archives, documents, petitions, reports. They were Indio men rendered illiterate by colonial education. The local writing system had been erased, and Spanish literacy belonged only to the elite, so their traces survive only as transcriptions by colonial clerks. There are no photographs of them, no recordings, only traces. But the closest I have ever come to them is through their signature on passport applications, scrolled beneath the scribe's perfect penmanship. In those signatures, I imagine their breath, their presence. A Bicolano trumpetist, an Ilocano clarinetist, a Cebuano flutist, their imagination of the vast world interconnecting through their music. After independence in 1946, the story did not end. Steamships became airplanes, municipal bands turned into show bands. By the 1970s, thousands of Filipino musicians worked abroad as overseas Filipino entertainers. Music became an export commodity, providing for families left behind and supporting an ailing national economy through remittances. Empires fell, flags changed, but the Manila musicians still shaped the soundscape across Asia Pacific. This project, which began in the archives and ended in listening, became my book, Sounding Modernities. While I have not coordinated with my publisher, Palgrave, which is Palgrave, to organize a desk to sell my book here, a little bit of a capitalist invitation, but if the story resonates to you, please get a copy of the book. It's available on all major online distributors. If you could, next slide, please. Sorry, this is slightly different. I do have a coda, which is a short addition, just to connect to something as well of like the Philippines being here in Germany. In the historical period where my book concludes, a new technology was emerging, the sound recording. Colonial administrators, missionaries, anthropologists, ethnographers, and even composers brought this technology into colonial spaces. They recorded the voices of colonized people, often without names, without consent. Many of these recordings remain in European museums and archives, detached from the communities that gave them life. Many are in fact at the Berlin Phonogram Archive. Knowledge, disciplines, and careers have been built around them, but the recorded people themselves remain anonymous. Where my book ended, a new project emerged. To fill the gaps of the written archive, I needed to find the voices, if they survive. So in the last 12 years, through my project, Sonic Entanglements, Decolonizing Southeast Asian Sound Archives, and Resound, funded by the Dutch Research Council and the European Union, I worked to reconnect the extant audio recordings with their source communities and families, to name the voices and restore the relations that colonial knowledge severed. Two of the recordings link directly to the Philippines. If you're curious, I can share 2 short clips. I'm curious. Great. So one is the voice of Bernardo Gabriel Adriano, a librarian from the University of the Philippines who was recorded in Berlin in 1930 while training at the Prussian State Library, reciting Florante at Laura. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, these are just images of our project where we are now repatriating some of the materials that we found in the archives here. Can we go to the next slide, please? Can we play the audio, please?
Ilang talatang hango sa tulang Florante at Laura ni Francisco Baltasar, hari ng mga Makatang Tagalog. Sa loob at labas ng bayang Puntawi, kaliluhay siyang nangyayaring hari. Kagalingay at bait ay nalulugami, ininig sa hukay ng dus at sikhati. Ang magandang asal ay pinupukol sa laot ng dagat ng Putyat Lingatong. Palang magagaling ay ibinabaon at inililibing sa walang kabaw.
Another set was made in 1933 by a Hungarian composer, János Takács, who recorded Kalinga music in the Cordilleras. Here is the recording of the Bontok Tude.
Ilang talatang hango sa tulang
Next slide, please. It's just a short one, just for as a sampler. No? So these wax cylinders, particularly today, were nearly lost to time. For 5 years, I have been persistently knocking at the doors of the Phonogram Archive in Berlin. And last April, they have finally digitized this. And soon we will bring these voices back home, repatriated not as museum artifacts, but as living connections. Ancestral voices returning to their communities almost 100 years old after they were recorded. The work continues in the same question that began with the Manila musicians. How do we listen to those written out of history? And how do we let them be heard again? Next slide, please. And vielen Dank, maraming salamat sa pagdinig at pakikinig. Thank you for listening.
Dankeschön, another phrase I learned. Are there any questions for our panelists? I have a question for the two of you. What made you interested in going to music? No, I understand that Professor Santos wanted to be a visual artist first. That's what I read. Maybe you can correct me. He was he was on his way to another university, UST, but the line in the enrollment was too long. So he went to the other university, which is a good thing, the University of the Philippines, and enrolled in music. Tell us, Professor, what made you go into music?
I don't know. You know, well, my brother and I used to paint. You know, in fact, he became a visual artist. But then I entered the seminary, and there I was exposed to Gregorian chant. And of course, I joined the Schola Cantorum. And then during recreation period, instead of playing ping pong or playing chess, I would listen to classical music. And, you know, our family was quite musical because my grandmother taught us piano and solfeggio and all that. Anyway, so when my mother asked me what course I'm going to take up, I just said music, you know. And she asked me, are you going to be happy with music? I said, probably. And then I went to UST because, you know, being raised as a Catholic a Catholic, you know, I used to be a sacristan, you know, a what do you call that?
Acolyte.
Acolyte. And so I was very religious at the time. And so I went to UST, but then, well, you said the lines were long, and so we went back. And my mother, my sister told me, why will you go to UST? Because they were all enrolled in UP. And so anyway, to make the long story short, I went to the University of the Philippines. And there I was accepted.
Thank you very much. meLê is used to be a theater major like me, right? Why did you go to music and music theory?
You make it sound like it's past tense. I still do that. I do it both. But maybe like as a short note here, I do not come from necessarily a privileged background. In fact, I think both my grandparents are farmers, and it was my parents who probably were the first to have been ever educated in the university. And so I think it was my mother who was responsible for both of this. Like, I think it was her ambition. She brought a piano. She was back in the 80s. Remember, now we think of it as the beginning of the carbonization of the world. She was selling a lot of Tupperwares in the 80s. And out of that, she bought a piano. It was an 80s ambition at that time to bring a piano at home. And so I was forced to learn the piano, but I was also a weirdly shy boy. And so my mother actually decided, without even asking me, to enroll me in the drama club in the elementary school, without me knowing that these acts of my mother would end up becoming my livelihood even, and my profession now. So I ended up in the Philippine High School for the Arts, indeed, where I did major in theater, but I was minoring in music composition. With Jonas Baez. And so, but to me, I never see, and I think this is important to point out as well, that in Southeast Asia, the distinction between disciplines, these are very European categories, because in Southeast Asia, disciplines overlap. Like, whenever I'm attending festivals, it's so hard to say, like, are you a theater or musician or dancer? Because those distinctions almost never exist, because you are most of the time all of that when you are a performing artist in Southeast Asia.
I agree. We are very good at multitasking, no? We cook and dance and sing at the same time. Yeah. What do you think? I want to ask this to the panelists since there are no questions from the audience. Oh, there are! Wonderful. Thank God you saved me. Go.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I took a lot of notes and I learned a lot. And I wasn't actually expecting a panel on music since it's a book fair, but I was thinking a lot about books in the past months and why in Europe, at least in the German-speaking world, we don't have so much access to books. And then I came up with some theories. And now, applying that to music, I was wondering if you had any insights, because I'm from Switzerland. My name is Lenny, and sometimes there's randomly on the radio, you sometimes hear Freddie Aguilar, Anak, right? But then otherwise, there's really no presence of Filipino music. And it's such a contrast because, as you said, we are so musical and there's such a big repertoire of music. And I was wondering if you could also contextualize that with colonialism, like modern forms or prevailing forms of colonialism. So the question in short would be, why do we not hear Filipino music on German radio?
Why do we not hear Filipino music on German radio? Any one of my panelists can answer. Who wants to answer first?
I have something to say, but maybe Dr. Santos would like to say something.
No, I don't know what the German taste is. But of course, they patronize their own music, of Beethoven and Bach and all that. I don't know if the German audience has an open mind more than just like Filipinos are, because we've been exposed to different colonial experiences. That's why I think our musical perspective is perhaps more universal than the Germans. Anyway, that's how I would put it.
May I add something to that, Professor? The absorption rate of Filipinos with regard to practices is really, really very high. In fact, I want to ask meLê, when you say that the Manila men promulgated or became the highways to modern music, global music, are you saying that they are parrots? Like they listen and then they repeat? Or are they something else? They're innovators. They listen, they put it in their system, and then something different comes out.
Thanks for the question, but I also maybe connect my response.
I'm sorry.
To the response,
Yes.
and then connect it to this.
Yes, yes.
And my response will be a little bit perhaps philosophical, but bear with me a little bit. No, but it's not this philosophical reflection is not necessarily abstract. I say it's philosophical because disciplines such as ethnomusicology, Musikwissenschaft, would be born in the beginning of the 20th century, particularly actually here in Germany, because and this particular distinction, when you create something as an academic discipline, as something to be studied, then you segregate it almost from, you segregate it from the practice. And then you start to standardize things. So in a way, our being here in a book fair is intertwined with like how music moved from practice to become printed notes on paper to eventually becoming a standardized thing that needs to be read rather than performed. And that epistemological shift really was born when ethnomusicology was when musicology what started to happen. But I also have to make the distinction that because of this segregation of disciplines, which is musicology and ethnomusicology, is because in Germany, particularly just this German way of thinking of academia, is that if you want to study Bach and Beethoven and Mozart, then you do musicology. But if you want to study everyone else who is not white, then that's ethnomusicology. And this still even defines the fact that we have an ethnomusicological museum, which is like all, like everything material culture produced by other cultures. And then you have the Fine Art Museum, which is a museum where mostly white artists who create material culture. No? So this distinction is part of the reason why how this segregation of like what cultural production is still are considered contemporary even, no? So I think this is very important for me because it's not as if the West is not engaging with indigenous music. In fact, by the 1950s, when John Cage stepped up to establish new music, he knew that it was the dead end of Western civilization. There's no more material to be taken out of it. So he needed to go to other cultures to create the modernity, the newness of music, but without necessarily citing where he took those sources.
meLê, we'll get another question. There was a person here who was raising, yes, sir.
Hello, I'm Daniel. I have a question about today or now. We talked about the past, but how is the Philippine music impact the South Asia areas right now? Is there a big impact, or is it more regional?
Can you?
Should I cook? Okay. I mean, my question is, how is let's say the pop music or any music of the Philippines impact South Asia? Like, I mean, I heard about J-pop, I heard about K-pop, but how is like, for example, the Philippine music talked in Japan, or do they know people in China know about the Philippine music? That's my question. How impact the Philippine music today?
What is the impact of contemporary music in Southeast Asia or the world?
Well, the musical world now has opened up, and each region has a contribution to the world music. K-pop, for example, but it depends on the popularity of these different genres that have come up. But the Philippines is quite unique because we absorb different cultures and we turn it into our own expression. Just like the rondalla, we got that from Spain, but we turned it into our own. And the compositions now that are being written are really Filipino in terms of feeling, in terms of ideas. So, as you know, the world has entered into a new era of musical experiences. It's no longer just purely European or even African music is very much in the world now. So perhaps my suggestion would be to just enjoy these different developments in the world of music.
Thank you, sir. meLê.
I'll keep it short. I want to think of it in two ways. Particularly when we engage with time, because music is about time. But our notion of time has entered two categories. One, which is chronos, which we believe that the world is progressing more and more and becoming better, bigger and wider, which is this idea of modernity, as if everyone is being recruited there. And if we believe in this, then some people will fall out in this concept of time. But there are also concept of time that is circular, which is repetitions. So on the one hand, in this chronos time, I think one of the most interesting composer, Jose Maceda, actually still quite important. I was just in Oslo 2 weeks ago, and his Cassettes 100 has just recently been performed, and we are considering, for example, staging also Udlut Udlut again in Berlin. But because he is one of those who has drawn from all these indigenous practices in the Philippines as material for imagining modernity. But then again, that is really one category of music where you have to keep up making something new, as if time is about making something new so that it becomes newer and newer and newer, as if modernity is like that. But I think one important fact that if you go around Asia, you would also always find Filipinos playing music everywhere, because there's another concept of time that Filipino musicians also do, like folding time as if it's a repetition. So when you ask me, are they not original? But what is original? Like, is that the goal of things? There are also artists who bring us to a sense of repetitions, but it is in this repetition that we could imagine newness. Because that is also the sense of cyclical time. There's a German philosopher who argues that it's not about the 100th or the 1,000th times that you've seen the bread, in masses being brought up, but you believe that it's always the first time that the bread is becoming the body of Christ in a Catholic belief. In the same way that every time a music is played, it's the first time that is happening, but it is in these multiple repetitions that things slowly change. And I sometimes do not believe in that innovations are the ones that will change our world, but it is in the ability to keep entering these spaces in repetition and the small changes that happens within it that would actually create change. And that is what the Manila musicians, although they seem to be absent in innovation as we imagine it, although there's a Jose Maceda line, but I think the most important thing is that the ability to create that presence through music that my Manila musicians and the Philippine musicians today continue to do.
Cricket sound. Well, are there any other questions from the audience? There you go. Two more questions.
You mentioned that you'll be bringing back your research to the communities. How do you envision to present the materials that you research to the communities, and how do you see them using that, like to enrich their present day lives?
Thank you. It's not up to me to do that envisioning. So the digitization happened in April, and we organized a small listening session online with some of the source communities. As you can imagine, Wax Cylinder is it's practically the oldest recording system. No? But it is portable. That's the reason why the recordists managed to bring them usually to villages, and then it doesn't require electricity. But this is also, because it doesn't require electricity, it's really analog. You have to shout inside this horn, and then you have to crank it up to be able to record. And so the first thing that I did is we started cleaning them up because they were so noisy. Many of the elders were so annoyed listening to during the Zoom session that it was just so noisy. And then I employed a little bit of AI to this. I could talk about that if anyone is interested, because it's fascinating what AI does in the cleaning of the system. And then we started doing some listening sessions again. Two topics emerged. My work at the moment, although my Manila musicians, I've started with that. The work that I've been doing for the last really 12 years is moving towards what I call sonic justice. What are we doing with sound? And to me, sound is a site of justice. And therefore, it's a question. The return is, we're now encountering a lot of museums doing all this repatriation, and I'm always wondering, will that give justice? No. So one of the things we're doing is consulting the source community and asking, do you want them back to begin with? Because they are also full of ghosts. Not just, on the one hand, these are voices of ancestors who are being heard for the first time. We want them to be named. Who sang these songs? Some of them recognize some great-great-grandfather, or great-grand-uncle. But on the other hand, they're also carrying institutional ghosts of colonization, of Europe, of Germany. And do we want the source community to deal with that if we return that, right? So we do want that as part of the process. And I'm working also with the Berlin Phonogram Archive to hold a big conference and a discussion, because it is both justice and law. We want to bring elders from Southeast Asia, because this is not just the Philippines. I'm also returning materials of Yapkuns to Bali and to Java. We want to bring elders from those communities who may have a different concept of justice to Germany, because right now, even if we return these files, Germany remains to be the custodian. So the ownership still hasn't changed. So there are many things I think that we need to fix, both from multiple levels, because the question even of who owns this music is still shrouded with a lot of legalities. That is why I think, to me, it is important that we think of this through the sense of justice. Not just the claiming of ownership, but how will new sense of justice arrive? Because I also want to point out, for example, that these recordings of the Kalinga ended up becoming, what happened is that Yeno Takash ended up composing a piano suite based on the Kalinga music. And I say colonialism is extraction because it's an extraction of something, material usually. It usually comes to Europe, and then an entire capital is built, profit is earned, but that profit never goes back to the source community. And so this is one of the things that we want to ask, how do we want the source community to partake as well in this recording that came here and created a new system?
Thank you very much. We are delving into copyright law.
Yes.
Yes.
Certainly. And Nick,
and I am an expert on Philippine copyright law.
And Nick, you will be part of this conference in Berlin.
Yes. Ifat.
Yes, this book fair has kind of revolved around Rizal as our part of the birth of our nation. And one thing that Rizal could not do is sing. He has accepted that he's not a musical person. And I just noticed that our other heroes were good at fine arts, visual arts.
He was well-versed in flute.
Oh, he was?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's very good to know because we excelled in the other arts like painting and sculpture and at least in that time. Would you say this is because our original music before colonization was not individualized but community, not performative but celebratory?
Yes, I want to insert an additional question to that because it dovetails into this question. What do you think is the relationship between playing music and the formation of the national spirit? Ipat was observing that maybe during the revolutionary times, people were unified because our heroes employed music, no? Like music to rouse people to revolution and stuff like that. And I noticed that when playing music together, like bands, Rondalia, the Manila Men, people gather, no? So is there an indication that these practices of playing together, being one in one music contributes to national unity or national spirit?
Dr. Santos?
Go ahead.
I'll answer in a slightly different way because I'm asking a similar question, but I ended up in a slightly adjacent way. And if I may ask, if you could show the very last slide of my PowerPoint, because this is at the core of my book actually. So although the Manila Musician is chapter 6 of my book, I just wanted to say that one of the things that I have been thinking as a Filipino who migrated to Europe is because I think it's magnified, right? So this notion of like what is Filipino? And one of the things that I have, as I've theorized, is that I've theorized this triangulation of sound, body, and sonus. And sonus is a theoretical concept that if we can show the PowerPoint, then you would see it. But to simplify this, I always say that if I play the Filipino national anthem now, all the Filipino bodies would have a particular relationship happening to that sound that no other bodies would have. And so it became important to me, and I realized that sound, there you go, that something happens between the body and sound. And that relationship is what I call the sonus. What I have just explained is extreme simplification, right? Because in a way, the nation does not really exist because it's an epistemological construction. But through music, if we play the national anthem now, it exists because the sound as material object interacting with our body is producing it. And so that is why, to me, that is the relationship of music and sound. In as much as, but right now, that was in my book, but I have moved on. But what I realized as well is that sound, because this is a triangle, and I'm thinking a lot in trigonometries lately, because if you make the body and the sound up, if you make one side of the triangle absent, you could always guess it by having 2 points. So I'm saying that because that's what I realize is that who are the Filipinos? What if I cannot listen to them? But if I have 2 points, I would always be able to find the third one. Two things that I've realized about this is that, for example, when I started talking to Indonesian friends lately, there were concepts such as the tabi-tabi po, but they have even a kolonawon, which is an even more complex notion, that it is still in my body. The Spaniards took it away. But if I go to my neighbors, the sonus in the body is still existing, but the word or the sound has disappeared, but I could still find it by excavating it in other bodies. In as much as sound is also producing bodies. This is now where I am. Like we are being constituted as Filipinos, so it's not just the nation that we are creating as we play music. The music is also constituting us.
That's a lot to think about, but I can understand in my terms that there is a musical DNA, and that the musical DNA is the one that either determines our relationship with sound. So because the orange sign is up, yes, it means time's up, and time goes by if you're having a good time, and surely we had a great time. Give them a big hand. And it's now time to vacate the stage for the next presentation. Thank you very much for attending the session.